Welcome to the Business Resilience Decoded podcast, brought to you by Asfalis Advisors and the Disaster Recovery Journal. Crisis management in today's world is ever-changing, and this podcast is our commitment to help you navigate successful outcomes for any crisis you may face. I'm your host, Vanessa Matthews. I specialize in providing insights and solutions for crisis, continuity, and resilience across industries from real estate and healthcare to terrorism in the airline and transportation worlds. No matter what industry you're in, this podcast will provide you the tools to build resilience in your organization. Welcome back to another episode of the Business Resilience Decoded podcast. Today, we're going to be talking to Fred Cartwright. But before we get started, I wanted to share a few resilience resources and reminders. The Disaster Recovery Journal hosts a new webinar every Wednesday, so please be sure to check the show notes to find the link for this week's webinar. And Asfalis News, the Road to Resilience program, is available, as well as upcoming public speaking opportunities. So please feel free to check our website to find out more information in the show notes. And lastly, if you enjoy our podcast, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. This helps more listeners to find us, and it also lets us know that we're adding value for you for these podcasts. All right, so let's jump right in and meet our guest. His name is Fred Cartwright. We're going to be talking about the intersection of logistics and crisis management. He is the Director of Engineered Solutions with Haversack. Fred, nice to see you today.
Nice to see you today. Thank you for having me on. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. So this podcast is going to be more of just a conversation like we typically have, where we just kind of go back and forth discussing logistics and crisis management as we are, at the tail end of 2021, walking into 2022. There's always a conversation about supply chain and how it will affect businesses in the future. So before we dive into the topic, Fred, can you share a little bit about your background with our subscribers and really how you got into the field of logistics?
Absolutely. Thank you so much again for having me on. I've been in this field for 18 years, working in various aspects of the supply chain, from the logistics, supply chain and transportation roles. I worked with some big names like Honeywell, Best Buy, BMW, and Coca-Cola Consolidated here in Charlotte, North Carolina. That's where I currently live. How I got into this industry was kind of unique. I was actually studying music for most of my time in college, and then, I worked at FedEx International in college part-time at night. I would go to class during the day, take a little snooze during class, and then, throw some boxes at the airport at night. And it just gets into your skin. I think I've heard that from a lot of people. It's the best way to describe it. Like logistics just kind of it stays with you. And I never left. That's what I've been doing my whole career. Various levels, various aspects, and I've enjoyed it all for sure.
Awesome. Music class to logistics.
Yeah.
That's an interesting path. So can you tell our listeners a little bit more about what are you currently seeing in the market from a supply chain perspective? And that's probably very broad, but I like to kind of go broad and then let's narrow in.
Yeah, I go through a couple of different, developments right now from a crisis standpoint. Obviously, the pandemic is the first one, right? That's just it's largely disruptive. It's just kind of hanging around, right? There's been a lot of discussions and a lot of the people that and the resources that companies would go to gather intel on how long is this shortage going to last, or how long is this impact going to disrupt my supply chain. Those forecasting types of individuals and resources are having trouble figuring out when the end of this is going to be, right? When do things stabilize, right? And that is not a question that I can answer either. I think that we're looking at years before things stabilize, only because you have the normal disruptions that occur that were going to occur whether there was a pandemic or not. Then you throw the pandemic on top of it, and there's a lot of variety there. But an example of that would be the semiconductor shortage. You might have heard of the chip shortages that are going on, the electronics industry, that spill into automotive industries, smartphones, all those types of things. We've got, GM shut down all their plants for 2 weeks, right? Volvo and other companies have done similar things because they don't have the chips and they're waiting for the supply chain to catch up. The plants overseas that make these chips, the demand is higher than it's ever been. Throw the pandemic on top of that, and it's just about as chaotic as you can imagine, right? So a lot of these companies are scrambling, trying to come up with a new solution, but obviously they're in the pinch right now, and there's not much you can do except for try to move some things around and work through that. Another thing that we're experiencing is some of the international shipping arena, which means that a lot of companies are manufacturing items overseas, and they need those items picked up, and they're having trouble getting those things picked up in a timely manner. A lot of it rides on ships, so there's delays getting into the vessel. The vessels are late because the ports are overloaded in whatever country they're going to, and we're experiencing that heavy in the United States now. Vessels are just circling the ports, waiting for their time to come in. So all that freight, everybody's freight is coming in late. It's all hot. That is creating mass chaos as far as some companies. I was talking to a large shipper here locally, and they were telling me that there's certain products that they have sold on the sales side, and some key innovations that they have provided to the market. However, they can't get their products, right? And so the customers are basically saying, look, I'm just going to buy this other product from this other client because I can get it faster. They have it on the shelves. I can't get my product here in time. So, I mean, what do you do in that situation now? There's a lot of, that's just one example of that. But as those vessels arrive here to the U.S. and those products come off the ships and are trucked to their destinations, right? I mean, then you have a high demand for the trucking industry, on-time deliveries, just-in-time deliveries, expedites, all those types of things. Everything is hot to every client, whether it be a manufacturer that needs to complete it for a component shortage, or some kind of goods that need to deliver to somebody's house, residence, right? Everything's hot, right? So that's creating some disruptions there and a lot of crisis there. And that generates that domestic competition, which in some ways you might say is a good thing. However, that creates crisis for some of these other logistics companies. For example, I just ordered some batteries here about 5 minutes ago before I started recording this podcast. And, I can order from Amazon today, and they're going to deliver to my house today. So you think about that and the Amazon effect, right? And how that is creating a change in the supply chain industry. It's really great that I can do that, and I totally take part in that. However, that has ripples through other logistics companies and their resources and how they're set up in their designs, right? Some business that potentially those companies had relied on is not going to be there, sort of like the Walmart effect, right? So that creates the need for companies to build some agility and, those types of challenges.
Awesome. You said a lot. I'm going to go back and pull on a few of those. So one question is, as you think about the things that you talked about from a shipping perspective to parts that are manufactured overseas, to even people who are just not coming to work because of whatever reason, whether it be COVID or something else, are you seeing anything that might be more industry specific versus another? So for example, like healthcare is super dependent on a global supply chain, aviation, cars, right? Are you seeing any industries that have any trends for some of the things that you talked about today?
Yeah, I would say from the latest, crisis from where I sit, and getting the most noise and notice is that automotive impact, right? With a chip shortage, that is what everybody's talking about. It's creating there's a lot of money tied up into the automotive industry, all aspects of it. You think about all the suppliers for these plants making these parts, all the staff that needs to do that. You shut down for 2 weeks. That creates a lot of disruption there, a lot of costs that are not covered, right? You have all these people that are working for you labor force wise on the supply front and the manufacturing front and all these types of things. So it's definitely has a ripple down effect. And it's driving up the used car sales here domestically, as a result of that. And so then the demand's higher than the costs are higher. So then people that they don't even care if there's a chip shortage right now because they don't want to buy a new car. Well, if you want to buy a used car, the costs are higher. And then think about the impacts to fuel and other intrinsic type of ripples impacts that may occur further down the line. So I think that automotive thing is larger than it's. I mean, we're starting to see it with the chips, and I think that this is just the beginning. Unfortunately, if you read about it, it's really interesting because there's not really a clear line like, hey, this is going to end here because we're going to magically come up with a bunch of new chips, right? It takes a long time to add manufacturing in order to sustain, to build out, especially with the staffing shortages you mentioned in some of these countries and the COVID lockdowns. It's not like it's just free reign. Hey, we'll fly a bunch of labor in. We can't, those things are not readily available. So there's a lot of challenges in the automotive sector.
Absolutely. Okay. So in our world, in terms of helping companies to be more, resilient, as I think about our subscribers, some things that we might typically do are an exercise with your key suppliers that you depend on. They may assess vendor risk before you bring a vendor into the company. What are, what do you depend on for? What's the service level agreement? Do they have a business continuity plan and a cyber plan and a disaster recovery plan? So those are some things that we know in our field from a technical perspective, but I'm interested in your thoughts as a logistics specialist and a guru, if I can call you that. How can companies really prepare their supply chains to actually be more resilient? And for me, what that means is resiliency is all about absorb the impact, bounce back like a basketball, right? You don't want to throw a ball on the ground and it doesn't bounce. You want it to throw it and it bounces. So how can companies really prepare their supply chains?
Right. That's great. I like what you said about and I was thinking about this earlier, that the risk assessment, contingency planning, all that type of thing, that's really critical in each line of your business. And that includes supply chain, right? Understanding what those risks are, sitting in a room for hours and writing all the risks out. I mean, it's crucial. It's missed a lot of times, but and really thinking through, okay, what would we do in this type of situation? What would we do? And it's really important. So that piece, but I guess rewinding, I would say the first thing is I would say, it's kind of a funny thing. I would say offer a competitive product. And so that means in today's market, thinking ahead to tomorrow's market, is our product viable? I've seen a lot of companies have had to totally pivot due to COVID and other types of things that they have encountered, right? And so making sure before you lock everything and invest a ton of money and resources and planning management and all that kind of stuff, making sure you have a competitive product, sourcing domestically when possible. So whenever you're building products and doing that planning phase, making sure that you're sourcing it in the U.S. And that is, I take pride in the U.S., made in the USA. I love that stuff. However, this is not just to eliminate the resources we have in other countries. It's purely a logistical, a step that you're removing on the international supply chain challenge side, right? So if it's possible and you have to pay a little bit more, or if you're going to set up multi-layers of sourcing, make sure that second and third layer of sourcing as part of your plan, it can actually do it. Right. So if you have a supplier 80 miles away that is your third down the line, but they really can't do what you're doing, then they're not really on your list. So those are a couple things: forecasting and planning, making sure that you financially forecast and plan your orders, get that input from your sales group. That's really crucial to try to tie that head, plan ahead, get your manufacturing ahead of your demand. So you're not caught in the wayside. And then, my favorite is find a good transportation provider, find a good company that really cares about this is my Haversack plug. Find a good company that really cares about your end client's needs and reducing your costs and establish competitive rates. I mean, that's what it's what's gonna happen. And there's a lot of volatility out there in the rate world, and it's really hurting the financial aspects of some companies because they're having trouble forecasting it, or they misforecasted it, right? And so it's kind of out of control right now. So that's just a short list of some things that companies can do to help their supply chains be a little more resilient.
I learned a lot from you. My last question, what resources can you point our subscribers to stay abreast of the boatload of information that you just provided?
Yeah, I would say, obviously I work for a company called Haversack, offering logistics consulting solutions. Check us out at gohaversack.com. There are a plethora of resources out there. I would go to dat.com, DAT, and that'll give you some inputs on some of the, that's one of the resources I can think of. But so those are just a couple, I guess.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Thank you for joining us today.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Business Resilience Decoded podcast, brought to you by Asfalis Advisors and Disaster Recovery Journal. Make sure you check out the show notes for this episode to see all the upcoming events, programs, and ways we can support you. Make sure you subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts, leave us a review, and share it with a friend. Thanks again, and I'll talk to you in the next episode.